Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Narrator. I'm glad you're joining me tonight, or perhaps this afternoon, or even in the early hours of the morning, depending on where you are in the world. If you feel like sharing, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Whether you're curled up under the blankets, easing into rest after a long day, or simply letting your thoughts drift into calmer places, you're in just the right place. Tonight, we'll be taking a gentle stroll into the heart of a quiet forest. But don't let the stillness mislead you. Underneath the bark and deep in the soil, trees are murmuring. They're sending signals via networks that are more ancient than any human-built city. They nourish one another, send out danger alerts, and even raise their young within leafy, cooperative neighborhoods. Yes, trees have social lives, and tonight we'll be quietly listening in. Politely, of course. Before we sink beneath the forest floor and rise into the canopy together, I'll softly remind you, if you enjoy these calm, curious journeys, consider giving this video a like and subscribing if you haven't done so yet. It helps more than you might imagine, and allows me to continue creating videos like this for curious minds just like yours. Now, I'll do my best not to make this too fascinating. After all, the goal is to help you wind down. But if it happens to be just a little too engaging for sleep, at least you'll drift off knowing something new. Like how a tree sends a message, or why a mushroom may just be the forest's best form of long-distance communication. Take a deep breath, settle in. Let's begin. Picture yourself strolling through a tranquil forest. The sun peeks through the canopy in golden beams. The air carries the scent of damp earth and scattered pine. Somewhere off in the distance, a bird calls out with the kind of unbothered confidence that only comes from knowing you rule the place. It's peaceful, still. Yet under your feet, hidden within the soil and wrapped around the roots, another world is gently humming with activity. And I mean really humming. We tend to imagine forests as made up of individual trees, each growing, shedding leaves, and hoping that a squirrel doesn't decide to turn its branches into a chaotic nesting site. But in truth, forests are much more like interconnected neighborhoods or living communities. And most of that vibrant community life is occurring underground, far from view, and at a pace so slow that we humans, always rushing and caffeinated, barely register it. Let's begin with the roots. Trees, it turns out, aren't loners. Their roots often grow toward each other, and in some cases they even fuse together. This isn't random tangling, it's intentional connection. Sometimes this occurs between trees directly. Other times, it's aided by something even more remarkable: fungi. Now I know the word fungus might bring to mind moldy leftovers or suspicious corners of damp bathrooms. But in the forest, fungi are quiet champions. They're not just there to decompose, they also build and transmit. Meet the mycorrhizal fungi. It's a mouthful, but the term breaks down easily. Myco meaning fungus and rhiza meaning root. These fungi create intricate networks that envelop or even enter the roots of trees, forming a massive interwoven system scientists affectionately call the wood wide web. Unlike your home Wi-Fi, this system doesn't glitch during storms or pause to buffer a video. But what it does transfer is equally impressive: nutrients, chemical messages, and even electrical pulses. Through these fungal channels, trees can share water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sugars with one another. A tree basking in sunlight might send some of its extra carbon-rich sugars to a shaded sibling nearby. Another might share warning compounds if it's under attack by insects, giving neighboring trees time to activate their own defenses. These fungal threads, called hyphae, are incredibly thin. We're talking smaller than a strand of human hair. Yet when woven together, they form sprawling networks that can span vast distances. One study in Oregon discovered a single fungal organism stretching across almost 4 square miles. Yes, just one. They nicknamed it the humongous fungus. Scientists, for all their genius, do enjoy a good pun. This relationship is a prime example of a mutually beneficial arrangement. The trees provide sugars from photosynthesis to feed the fungi, and in return, The fungi help the trees draw minerals and water from places their roots can't reach on their own. They're like quiet underground couriers, and rather than asking for tips or subscriptions, they simply request a share of the sugars. Even more fascinating is how these networks don't limit themselves to trees of a single kind. A birch may link up with a fir, a pine might connect with a maple. This cross-species collaboration fosters a kind of silent diplomacy among trees that don't share soil preferences or seasonal habits, but do share information and resources. That's cooperation. Some trees seem to play an especially crucial role in this system. Older, deeply rooted ones with far-reaching networks. These trees often act as hubs, distributing nutrients and information to saplings, particularly to their own young. Scientists refer to them as mother trees. And while the name may sound a bit emotional, the data supports it. These older trees can distinguish their kin and appear to favor them when distributing resources. This upends the long-standing idea of nature as purely cutthroat, where survival is all about dominance. While competition certainly exists, trees still vie for sunlight and water. Collaboration plays an enormous role in keeping the forest thriving. The fungal networks help regulate that balance, ensuring no part of the forest becomes too weak or too dominant. And the fungi, they're not just passive middlemen. Some species are quite picky about whom they connect with. They may choose trees that offer better sugar exchange, or prefer species they've evolved alongside. Essentially, they manage an underground economy, with rules, preferences, and even the occasional bit of favoritism. It's important to pause here and appreciate the sheer longevity of this partnership. Fossil evidence reveals that plants and fungi have been co-evolving for over 400 million years. Long before the first flowers bloomed or trees rose to dominate landscapes, fungi were striking deals with ancient plants to trade nutrients. It's one of the most enduring alliances in the natural world, and it continues to function, unnoticed, beneath our feet every single day. And yet most of us stroll through forests unaware of this hidden network. We admire the tall trunks, the dancing leaves, maybe snap a photo of a squirrel being photogenic. But the real drama, the complexity and quiet brilliance, is unfolding under the soil, beneath our boots, our paws, and the very roots of the trees themselves. So next time you find yourself in a forest, take a moment to pause. Picture the unseen network below you, a web not of silk but of cells, of carbon and cooperation, a living system older than civilization, still whispering its messages through the cool, dark earth. Constant, unbroken, connected. And perhaps, somewhere deep in that hidden network, a tree might be sending along a message. Maybe a simple greeting, or maybe a soft reminder, that in a forest no one truly stands alone. Let's linger just a bit longer in the shaded stillness of the woods. Even now, something astonishing is happening, though your eyes might never catch it. There are no flashing lights, no waving limbs or bark tapping out Morse code. And yet right this very moment messages are flowing beneath the ground. Not fast. In fact, slower than any internet you've ever used, but no less effective. This is the Wood Wide Web, a real term coined with a grin by Dr. Susan Simard, a forest ecologist from British Columbia. It describes the vast system of fungal threads that connect trees in a forest, like so many living Ethernet cables. It's part hard science, part quiet poetry, and it's endlessly fascinating. You might think of forests as silent, solitary places. Trees growing alone, each trying to gather enough sunlight and rain to survive another year. But Dr. Simard's research turned that image on its head. She was among the first to demonstrate that trees are not just linked underground by mycorrhizal fungi. They actually use these connections to talk, share, and even care for one another. Picture it again, a dense forest filled with hundreds, maybe thousands of trees, different species, different ages, standing close, shoulder to shoulder. Above the surface, they might appear to be in competition. But below, they're connected, sharing nutrients, sending messages, and passing along warnings. So how exactly does this work? It's one thing to suggest that trees talk, but it's another to explain how an organism with no mouth, no brain, and no internet account manages to communicate. At the center of the Wood Wide Web are those same mycorrhizal fungi we discussed earlier. These fungi create partnerships with tree roots, essentially plugging themselves into the trees. Once connected, they begin expanding outward, growing long thread-like structures known as hyphae. These hyphae stretch through the soil, linking with the roots of other nearby trees and forming a constantly evolving and responsive network. Think of each tree as a server, and the fungal hyphae as fiber optic lines connecting them. The trees generate sugars via photosynthesis, converting sunlight into food, and they send a portion of those sugars down to their roots to feed the fungi. In return, the fungi provide hard-to-access minerals like nitrogen and phosphorus that the trees need. But this isn't just a two-player system. Once the fungi are linked to multiple trees, they become facilitators, allowing exchanges of nutrients, signals, and information between them. Imagine a tall, healthy Douglas fir soaking in sunlight. Through the fungal web, it sends some of its surplus sugars to a smaller, younger fir struggling in the shadows. Not because it's feeling particularly generous, but because, over time, forests that share resources tend to be healthier and more stable. Dr. Simard and her team conducted groundbreaking experiments to test these ideas. In one study, they introduced carbon isotopes into a few selected trees to track how the carbon moved below ground. What they discovered was surprising. The carbon didn't stay within the trees that received it. Instead, it showed up in the roots of neighboring trees and not at random. There was a clear pattern. Older trees supported younger ones. Healthier trees assisted weaker ones. Sometimes, even trees from different species contributed to each other. And one of the most touching discoveries, when a tree was dying from disease or drought, it would sometimes send out a final gift, a last surge of stored carbon released into the network to nourish others. Was this intentional the way we understand intention? It's hard to say, but the image it leaves is powerful, a last breath turned into sustenance for the forest. The generosity doesn't stop with sugar. Trees can also send out chemical messages when under attack. If a tree is being invaded by hungry pests, say aphids or caterpillars, it can release signals into the fungal web. Neighboring trees receive these alerts and begin boosting their own defenses, producing bitter chemicals in their leaves or calling for help by releasing compounds that attract the pest's natural enemies. It's the forest's version of sounding the alarm. And unlike us, who often overlook warning signs or ignore emails, trees respond. This hidden alert system is impressively intricate. Though it doesn't work quickly, signals might take hours or even days to travel. The timing is fast enough in the slow-paced world of trees to make a real difference. Imagine being able to strengthen your defenses before the danger even arrives, thanks to a quiet warning passed through your roots. But let's not idealize things too much. Not all trees are equally helpful. Some are generous contributors, while others tend to take more than they give. And even fungi, which generally act as helpful intermediaries, can play favorites, directing more resources to trees that provide better sugars, or to those species they're more compatible with. In this underground economy, generosity and cooperation are balanced with survival strategy. It's not always fair, but it often works. What emerges is a picture of the forest not as a random collection of trees, but as a coordinated living system. An intricate web of interactions where one tree's well-being can ripple out to affect many others. It's not unlike a brain, where signals and feedback flow across a vast, decentralized network. And this isn't speculative. It's backed by peer-reviewed science. These findings have transformed how we manage forests. Loggers and conservationists are learning that removing certain key trees, particularly the older, better-connected ones, can weaken the entire forest. They're now more careful about preserving these central figures in the network, because cutting down the wrong tree is like deleting a vital line of code in a program. things stop functioning properly. So the next time you're walking through a woodland and glance up at a tall tree, imagine the unseen threads below. Threads that stretch out beneath the forest floor, linking that tree to its neighbors. Threads that carry food, alerts, maybe even whispers of wisdom. And while we may not hear those messages with our ears, we can still tune into the quiet marvel of what's happening just beneath the surface. Deep in the woods, there are giants, not the kind with booming voices or magical powers, but massive, ancient beings that have watched the world change for centuries. They tower above us, their roots buried deep, their limbs moving with the breeze in slow, graceful arcs. They don't roar or stomp, but what they do is even more extraordinary. They care. Scientists have found that these towering elders, some of them hundreds of years old, are essential players in the forest's underground web. They aren't just the biggest trees with the best sunlight access. They're caretakers, mentors, and communication hubs. Researchers often call them mother trees. Now don't get the wrong idea. These trees aren't mothers in the same sense that animals are. They don't hand out snacks or offer bedtime stories. But through the underground fungal network, they send nutrients, signals, and support to smaller trees around them, especially to their own saplings. Dr. Simmert again played a key role in uncovering this behavior. In one of her well-known experiments, she traced carbon movement from mature trees to younger ones. She discovered that these old trees didn't hoard their sugars. They actively passed them along, favoring younger trees nearby, particularly those that were genetically related. Incredibly, trees seem to recognize their own offspring. This changes everything. Forests aren't just clusters of strangers growing in proximity. They're family systems, shaped by relationships that stretch across generations. A mother tree doesn't simply drop seeds and move on. She continues to help her saplings grow, offering them nutrients and guidance for years, sometimes decades, until they're strong enough to reach the canopy on their own. Picture a tiny sapling, barely a few feet tall, standing in the dim understory. Sunlight is scarce. Photosynthesis is difficult. But beneath the surface, a nearby mother tree is sending down carbon, nitrogen, and water. Not enough to turn the sapling into a giant overnight, but enough to keep it alive, long enough to grow, long enough to one day thrive. These mother trees don't just help their own. They contribute to the broader community too, distributing resources, buffering the forest during times of stress, and maintaining connections between many other trees. Like wise elders in a village, they hold things together, offering stability and experience. Some species, like Douglas fir, are especially good at this. In certain forests, a single mother tree can be linked to hundreds of other trees. Think of her as the main server in a quiet, leafy network, silently sending out support to those who need it. And in times of crisis, mother trees don't abandon their role. If one is badly damaged, by logging, storms, or drought, it often releases a final surge of nutrients and signals into the network before it dies. It's one last act of generosity, one final attempt to ensure that the next generation has a better chance of surviving. This system doesn't just include food and water. Trees also send chemical messages about threats, pests, diseases, changing conditions. Other trees, young and old, pick up on these messages and respond. It's like getting an emergency alert without the blaring sound. There's something deeply reassuring about this. The idea that even in the plant world care exists, that old trees help the young, that strength is something to be shared, not guarded. Of course, it's not all equal. Trees tend to prioritize their own offspring, and unrelated saplings may receive less support. It's a bit of quiet favoritism, but even so, the network continues to provide value to the forest as a whole. Signals travel, nutrients are shared, and more trees survive than would on their own. And this cooperative web isn't just inspiring, it's incredibly practical. It's what makes forests resilient. When one part suffers, others can compensate. When one species struggles, others adapt. Mother trees are vital to this adaptability, but here's the sad part. These elders are often the first to go during logging operations. They're big, valuable, easy to target, but removing them does more than take away a large tree. It removes a central node in the forest's living network. Saplings lose their support. Communication weakens. The entire system becomes more fragile. Thankfully, forestry is changing. More ecologists are speaking up, urging for the preservation of these central trees. In both wilderness areas and cities, people are learning to recognize the importance of large, old trees in maintaining healthy ecosystems. Because even a single, well-placed tree, properly connected, can make a huge difference. It can cool the air, clean the soil, and quietly support the growth of others nearby. So next time you walk under a towering tree, take a moment. Think of her roots reaching out below, linking her to a vast network of neighbors and kin. Think of her nutrients flowing outward, sustaining a sapling just finding its way. And see her not just as a tree, but as a guardian, a provider, a keeper of wisdom. In a world that often feels chaotic and disconnected, it's comforting to remember that somewhere, quietly, the forest is still teaching us how to care for one another. In the soft hush of a woodland, you might assume the only communication comes from chattering squirrels or the rustling of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. Trees don't talk, or at least not in the way we're used to. Yet they do communicate, and they do so in surprisingly effective, even crafty ways. While most of a forest's conversation occurs underground through fungal networks, trees also possess an impressive method of sending signals above ground, chemical messages carried through the air. Yes, trees can send alerts on the wind, just incredibly slowly. Picture this. A hungry caterpillar begins munching its way through the leaves of an acacia tree. It might not seem like a major crisis, unless you're the acacia. But instead of just enduring the slow destruction, the tree begins a defense. It starts producing tannins, bitter compounds that make the leaves much less appetizing. That's the botanical equivalent of slamming the fridge shut on an unwelcome guest. But the acacia doesn't stop there. It also releases volatile organic compounds, VOCs for short, into the air. These molecules drift through the forest, acting as airborne distress signals. Other trees in the vicinity detect them and begin ramping up their own chemical defenses, long before the caterpillars reach them. It's like a neighborhood alert that triggers everyone to lock their doors. This airborne messaging system isn't unique to acacias. Researchers have discovered that poplars, pines, maples, and even tomato plants can emit these warning compounds. When they're damaged or threatened, plants release their own distinct mixture of VOCs, which prompt other plants to respond accordingly. That response might involve making bitter chemicals, sending out toxins, or, in some clever cases, summoning predators to deal with the threat. Take the wild tobacco plant, for example. When a hornworm, a voracious caterpillar, starts gnawing on its leaves, the plant releases a scent that attracts parasitic wasps. These wasps swoop in, lay eggs inside the hornworm, and the larvae eventually consume the invader from within. It's brutal, effective, and remarkably well coordinated for a plant with no brain. You might ask, how do trees and plants even detect these signals? They don't have noses. That's true, but they do have specialized receptors on their leaves and surfaces. These receptors can detect certain VOCs, and when the molecules bind to them, they trigger a cascade of internal reactions, activating defense genes, setting off chemical pathways, and preparing the plant for battle. What's more, this kind of eavesdropping isn't limited to close relatives. Trees of the same species are typically more sensitive to each other's signals, likely due to similar chemical languages. But different species can also interpret each other's messages. It's not a universal tongue, but it's impressively multilingual for something that floats invisibly through the air. And it's not just warnings that get passed along. Some researchers believe that plants may also release chemical signals to coordinate growth and flowering. In a dense forest, it can be useful for nearby trees to bloom at the same time to boost their chances of attracting pollinators. Synchronized flowering is a kind of community event, even if it's silently arranged through a breeze. Now, while root-based fungal communication might be more complex and long-reaching, VOC signaling has its own advantages. For one, it's fast. Messages carried through the air can spread within minutes, compared to the hours or days it takes for fungal networks to transmit a signal underground. And air messages don't require physical connections, meaning they can reach plants that aren't plugged into the same network. The downside: airborne signals don't travel very far, usually no more than about 30 meters. That's roughly the length of 3 school buses. For a tree, it's enough to alert a few neighbors, but not ideal for long-distance announcements. In dense woodlands, though, that short range can be incredibly effective, covering a cluster of trees and allowing them to stay informed and ready. Interestingly, just like in human communities, some trees are more vocal than others. Some send alerts quickly and widely. Others keep to themselves. Some stressed trees may choose not to send signals at all, likely to conserve energy, or perhaps they simply don't have the resources to warn others while under attack. There are also plants that take advantage of this system. Certain parasitic species can detect VOCs from stressed hosts and use them to locate easy targets. Others pick up warning signals meant for different trees and prepare their own defenses, even if they're not directly threatened. It's like standing outside a bakery, catching the scent of bread and rushing in before the line forms. And communication doesn't stop with the air or fungal threads. There's another pathway: root exudates. These are chemicals released by plant roots into the soil that affect neighboring plants. Some are friendly, promoting growth. Others are territorial. Certain trees release allelopathic compounds that inhibit the growth of other plants nearby. It's not exactly polite conversation, but it is a clear message. This is my space. Please grow elsewhere. When you add it all up, a richer, more dynamic picture of forest life emerges. Trees aren't motionless or passive. They aren't slow in any meaningful sense. They simply operate on a rhythm we rarely notice. Instead of minutes and hours, their timelines stretch across seasons, years, even centuries. Their messages may be silent, but they carry weight. So next time you're near trees, pause, inhale that earthy forest scent. It might contain messages, warnings, greetings, maybe even a bit of leafy gossip, floating past your nose in the form of invisible molecules. You may not speak tree, but the trees, they've been speaking all along. If trees are the voices of the forest, then fungi are its phone lines, quiet, hidden, and absolutely vital. These unassuming organisms, often dismissed or ignored, are actually the backbone of everything. While the towering trees above steal the spotlight, without fungi, none of it would function, or even exist. Let's revisit the mycorrhizal fungi, the soil-dwelling organisms that form intimate bonds with plant roots. It's a relationship built on trade. The fungi gain access to the sugars trees create through photosynthesis, and in exchange, they help those trees gather water and minerals. But their role extends far beyond delivery services. Fungi are translators, brokers, and negotiators. There are two main kinds of mycorrhizal fungi: ectomycorrhizal and arbuscular mycorrhizal. They differ in how they attach to and interact with roots. Ectomycorrhizal fungi wrap themselves around the root's outer layer, forming a kind of sheath, like a cozy sock. These types usually associate with larger trees such as pines, oaks, birches, and beeches. They're the ones responsible for many of the mushrooms we see sprouting on the forest floor: chanterelles, bolete, truffles, and more if you're lucky and maybe very wealthy. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, by contrast, take a more intimate approach. They actually enter the root cells, forming tiny tree-like structures called arbuscules. These increase surface area and facilitate more efficient nutrient exchange. They typically bond with grasses, shrubs, and tropical plants. Unlike their ecto cousins, they don't produce flashy mushrooms, but they're far more ancient. Evidence suggests arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi have been forming relationships with plants for over 400 million years, long before today's forests even existed. Why are these connections so important? Imagine being a tree. You're stuck in one place forever, and you rely entirely on the soil around you for survival. But vital nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen often exist in tiny, inaccessible pockets. Fungi with their ultrafine hyphae can reach into those microscopic spaces and access what the tree cannot. In return, the tree offers sugars. It's not charity, it's a transaction. And like any market, there's negotiation. Trees can reward more productive fungi with extra sugars. Fungi, in turn, may prioritize trees that are more generous. This two-way trade is flexible, constantly adjusting to supply and demand. It's been compared to a stock exchange, just slower, quieter, and with fewer suits. What's even more fascinating is that the fungal network connects many trees, sometimes across species. Through this web, resources can move based on health, need, or age. A tall spruce in the sun might share carbon with a younger sapling growing in the shade. An older tree facing decline might release its stored nutrients into the system before it dies. Fungi aren't just passive messengers, they make decisions. Studies show they can direct nutrients where they're likely to get better returns. They may even favor certain species or trees they've worked with before. Some fungi form nearly exclusive partnerships. Others are happy to mingle with many types of plants. Think of them as selective collaborators, part logistics managers, part strategic investors. There's also evidence that fungi can influence plant behavior. Some species appear to affect root growth patterns, stem development, and even internal chemistry. Some researchers believe fungi may encourage trees to behave in ways that benefit the overall network. It's still under investigation, but whether it's subtle manipulation or just long-term coevolution, fungi clearly play a deeper role than we ever imagined. Still, the system isn't flawless. Just like any network, it has freeloaders. Some plants, like certain orchids, tap into the fungal web to take resources without offering anything in return. Some fungi form parasitic relationships, siphoning sugars without providing nutrients. Nature's full of cooperation, but it's rarely fair. Despite this, in a balanced forest, the system usually holds. The fungal network helps distribute resources, stabilize ecosystems, and buffer against hardship. It allows trees to survive in challenging conditions and bounce back after disturbances. When a tree falls, fungi help recycle its nutrients. When a seedling sprouts, it can connect to the network through nearby roots and tap into the forest's shared strength. And the most incredible part, most of this happens unseen. We walk through forests never realizing what lies beneath. Under every footstep, a living network hums, delivering food, warnings, and chemical conversations in silence. A web so vast and so complex that some scientists say it rivals the human brain. But fungi don't seek attention. They're the quiet workers, no fanfare, no show, just persistent, vital connections. Without them, there would be no forests, only isolated plants struggling to survive. So the next time you see a mushroom peeking from the leaves, don't think of it as just a quirky decoration. That's merely the fruit. Below it lies a hidden empire of threads and cells, linking, sharing, sustaining the life above. In that sense, a forest isn't just made of trees or fungi or roots. It's all of them together. A single breathing organism. A tapestry of whispers and exchanges. A memory written in soil. A forest is a place where cooperation often takes the spotlight, where trees share nutrients, fungi play the role of middlemen, and chemical messages float through the air and soil like leafy telegrams. It paints a picture of peace, unity, and balance. But let's not overlook nature's sharper edge. While forests are full of giving, they also house competition, a constant and often subtle battle for survival. Underneath all the collaboration is a continual push and pull. Trees are not just friendly neighbors, they're also competitors, vying for sunlight, space, minerals, and moisture. Cooperation and rivalry coexist, forming the dynamic tension that keeps a forest alive and adaptive. Let's start with the most essential resource of all, light. Sunlight is the energy source trees need to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugars through photosynthesis. It fuels not only the tree itself, but also the fungal network it supports. But light is limited, especially in dense forests where the canopy closes tight overhead. Up there, it's a race to the top. Saplings stretch upward, hoping to break through the leaf-covered ceiling. Some grow tall and spindly, sacrificing strength for speed. Others spread their leaves wide to capture whatever light manages to filter down. Those that can't get enough light slowly weaken and die, regardless of how well connected they are underground. In the forest, if you don't reach the sun, no amount of underground generosity can save you. Not all trees approach this competition the same way. Some are shade-tolerant. They can linger in the dim understory for years, growing slowly and waiting patiently for a break in the canopy. Others are shade-intolerant. They need open, bright conditions to thrive. This contrast helps shape a forest's diversity. It even adds a touch of passive aggression. One tree may grow fast and wide, blocking others from the light. Another might shed its leaves early, opening space for neighbors, or perhaps denying them the benefit by clinging to its foliage long after it's useful. And while this vertical battle plays out above ground, a quieter but equally fierce contest happens beneath the surface. Roots sprawl outward and downward in search of water and nutrients. Where one tree's roots reach, another's may find only scarcity. In areas where soil is poor or water is scarce, root systems become denser and more aggressive. Some trees even take things further by producing chemicals that suppress the growth of their neighbors. A classic example is the black walnut tree. It releases a compound called juglone, which seeps into the soil and inhibits the growth of many surrounding plants. It's not malice, it's strategy. By reducing local competition, the walnut secures more resources for itself. The area affected by juglone is sometimes called a juglone shadow, where even the most enthusiastic gardener might find their plants mysteriously failing. Other species have their own chemical tricks. Eucalyptus trees, for instance, shed leaves containing oils that hinder seed germination around them. Desert shrubs like creosote emit airborne compounds to keep nearby plants at bay. It's nature's version of drawing an invisible fence, one that says, "This patch is taken." And yet these competitive tactics don't cancel out the cooperative ones. Instead, they exist side by side, sometimes even within the same tree. A single species may share nutrients through the fungal web, while simultaneously producing root compounds that limit other plants' growth. Trees, like people, are complex. They can be generous in one moment and territorial the next. There's also what ecologists call the nurse effect. In challenging environments, like deserts or high-altitude regions, certain plants help others survive. These nurse plants offer shade, protection from wind, or extra moisture, improving the survival odds for nearby seedlings, sometimes even of different species. It's a form of selfless parenting, until those seedlings mature and start competing themselves. Timing plays a role too. Some trees release their leaves and resources at specific times to support or sabotage others. A few drop their leaves early in autumn, making light and nutrients available to others. Some hold onto their leaves longer, perhaps to deny that same opportunity. The fungal network below reflects this complexity. A tree might send carbon to a neighbor through the wood wide web, but only if resources allow. When supplies run low, the flow may stop. Some trees might try to manipulate the network, sending sugars or signals in ways that favor their own success. There's also root grafting, where roots of two trees, often the same species, grow together and fuse. This creates a direct connection for exchanging water and nutrients. It can be a powerful form of support, especially in difficult conditions like drought or poor soil. But it also comes with risk. If one tree is sick or dying, it might drain the life from its partner, weakening both. So where does that leave us? Are forests battlefields or communities? In truth, they're both. They are living systems shaped by cooperation and conflict, mutual support and silent rivalry. Trees help each other, but they also compete. Fungi share, but they also prioritize. Plants warn their neighbors, but some sabotage them too. It's not a world of perfect harmony. It's a world of balance. And perhaps that's what makes forests so robust. They survive and evolve not because everything gets along, but because the system is flexible. It includes space for giving and taking, for generosity and strategy. It adapts to challenges because it holds many possibilities, not just one way of being. That balance, messy, tangled, and beautiful, is what allows forests to endure. And maybe it's one of the quiet lessons they offer us. That strength doesn't always come from standing alone or winning every contest. Sometimes it comes from connection, from knowing when to help, and when to grow tall just enough to find your place in the light. Long ago, before we understood tree roots as anything more than anchors or drinking straws, plants were seen as solitary and silent, living sure but barely active. They grew, reproduced, and eventually toppled. That was the extent of it. But that view began to shift, slowly and steadily, thanks to curious scientists willing to dig deeper, literally. What they discovered, both with tools and with time, reshaped how we see forests, plants, and even the very concept of communication. Dr. Susan Simard is one of those trailblazers. As a young forester in British Columbia, she noticed something strange. Young trees thrived better when growing near certain older trees. Saplings that should have withered were doing surprisingly well. It didn't add up with the traditional model, where each tree was expected to fend for itself. She wondered, could trees be helping each other? To find out, she created an experiment that raised more than a few eyebrows. She planted paper birch and Douglas fir trees together in a forest, then introduced radioactive carbon into the birch trees by giving them labeled carbon dioxide. If the trees were truly independent, that labeled carbon should stay within the birch. But it didn't. Within days, the radioactive carbon appeared in the Douglas firs. Sugars made by the birch had moved underground, from one tree's roots to another's. And it wasn't random. When the firs were in shade and struggling to photosynthesize, the birches gave more. Later in the season, when the birches lost their leaves, the firs returned the favor. It was a quiet exchange, neighbors swapping what they had depending on who needed it most. It was a revelation. Trees weren't just competing. They were cooperating. Not always and not with every other tree, but often enough to matter. The forest wasn't just a crowd of individuals. It was something more. A community, or as Simard and others came to describe it, a superorganism. Her work built on decades of earlier research into mycorrhizal relationships. Scientists had long known that plant roots and fungi partnered underground. They'd seen it under microscopes, cataloged fungal species, and observed the mutual benefits. But before the 1990s, few imagined these networks could be highways of communication. The problem wasn't lack of evidence. It was lack of imagination. For most of the 20th century, biology leaned heavily on Darwinian models of competition. The strongest survive. That framework painted forests as battlegrounds. Cooperation was seen as accidental or even suspicious. Besides, how could trees communicate? They didn't have brains or mouths or nerves. But communication doesn't require speech or even awareness. It only needs a signal, a response, and a purpose. And one by one, scientists began to uncover the quiet signals of plant life. Carbon isotopes, DNA tracing, and new imaging tools revealed the world beneath our feet, a dense, living web of fungal threads and chemical messages. In Japan, studies on willows and poplars showed that insect-damaged trees emitted signals that nearby trees picked up, triggering their defenses. In Sweden, experiments on bean plants proved that underground communication could occur even without any above-ground cues. In Africa, Researchers found that giraffes munching on acacia trees triggered a chain reaction. Trees downwind produced tannins in anticipation of attack. Slowly, what had once sounded like botanical fantasy became accepted fact. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some scientists argued that calling these behaviors communication implied too much, that it made trees sound conscious or deliberate. But others pointed out that intention wasn't necessary. Communication, in biological terms, simply means information is shared in a way that affects behavior. If a tree sends carbon to a sapling, and the sapling grows, that's communication. If a flower emits a scent to draw in a pollinator, that's communication too. And if that behavior increases the survival chances of both, even better. Meanwhile, the discoveries kept coming. Fungi were shown to make strategic decisions, favoring certain trees, choosing better partners, reacting to changes in their environment. Some scientists even found evidence of electrical pulses, tiny shifts in voltage, traveling along fungal hyphae. Not quite like neurons, but close enough to be fascinating. None of this means that trees think. They don't plan, they don't reason, but they do respond. They do adapt. And most importantly, they've been doing all of this for millions of years, quietly, consistently, without anyone watching. Only recently have we begun to listen. So the next time you walk into a forest, try to see more than just the trunks and leaves. Try to see the connections, signals flowing through roots, messages carried on the wind, fungi stitching the soil together like a living web. It took years of careful science and a few radioactive carbon atoms to uncover this world. Now that we know it's there, we can never unsee it. And maybe that's the lesson. That sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones we've always stepped over without noticing. What does it mean to be intelligent? For most people, intelligence suggests problem-solving, memory, learning, and maybe even self-awareness. We often associate it with neurons and brains, organisms that can navigate mazes, remember tasks, or pass mirror tests. By those standards, trees seem entirely outside the conversation. They're silent, rooted, and, at a glance, completely brainless. But the more we uncover about how they function, the harder it becomes to deny that there's a kind of quiet sophistication in how they behave. Many scientists today describe this as plant intelligence, not because trees are self-aware, but because their actions show memory, responsiveness, and adaptability. All of this without a single neuron. Let's begin with perception. While trees don't have eyes, ears, or mouths, they're constantly monitoring their environment. Through proteins and specialized receptors, they detect changes in light, temperature, gravity, and chemical presence in the air or soil. A tree knows where sunlight is strongest, how dry the soil has become, and even if a neighboring tree is under attack from insects. This awareness allows trees to respond with impressive subtlety. For example, when a tree senses it's in the shadow of another, it will modify its growth, elongating its trunk faster to reach sunlight or adjusting its branches to gather more rays. That's not passive growing. That's active adjustment triggered by external cues. Or think about how trees handle drought. When water is limited, a tree doesn't simply wilt like a neglected houseplant. Instead, it carefully closes its stomata, tiny pores on its leaves, to minimize moisture loss. At the same time, it might redirect its energy to grow deeper roots, searching for underground water. In extreme conditions, it may even drop its leaves entirely, a calculated shutdown designed to survive until rainfall returns. Each of these moves isn't reflexive. They're based on assessment and adaptation, a kind of decision-making, even if it's all biochemically driven. And here's where things get even more compelling. Trees seem to remember. One famous experiment involved the mimosa plant, which folds its leaves inward when touched. Scientists repeatedly dropped the plants from a small height. At first, every drop caused the mimosa to close its leaves. But over time, it stopped reacting. The plant had learned that the drop wasn't dangerous, and this memory lasted. Even weeks later, the mimosas still ignored the drop but reacted to other unfamiliar stimuli. These were small plants, not trees, but the implications ripple outward. They demonstrated habituation, a form of learning seen in animals, and they did it all without neurons. So what about trees? Evidence is growing. Studies show that trees remember the timing of environmental changes. After experiencing an early frost, for example, some species delay budding the next spring, avoiding the risk of exposing tender leaves too early again. That's a behavioral shift based on past experience. Trees also display remarkable spatial awareness. In soils with patchy nutrients or intense competition, roots grow deeper and faster in nutrient-rich zones and slower in poor areas. Some roots will grow away from aggressive neighbors. Others adjust depending on the chemical signals in the soil. And perhaps most fascinating, trees sometimes prepare for threats before they arrive. When a tree nearby begins releasing distress VOCs due to pest damage, other trees pick up the scent and start producing defensive chemicals, even though they haven't been attacked yet. They're not reacting, they're anticipating. That kind of proactive response suggests a capacity to process signals, interpret meaning, and act accordingly. Still, let's be clear. None of this implies that trees are conscious. They don't think, dream, or plan in the way animals do. There's no mental model guiding their behavior. But what they show is a different form of intelligence, one deeply embedded in their structure, biochemistry, and relationships. Some researchers refer to this as decentralized intelligence. Unlike animals, which centralize processing in a brain, trees spread their sensory and response systems throughout their entire bodies. Roots respond to soil conditions. Leaves track light and airborne chemicals. Branches adapt based on local growth conditions. It's a bit like a networked computer without a central processor, input and output distributed everywhere. Sound familiar? It should. The fungal networks trees connect to operate in a similar way. So do ant colonies and beehives. Intelligence, it turns out, doesn't require a skull. Still, whether trees are intelligent depends largely on how you define the term. If intelligence includes the ability to respond to the environment, learn from past events, prepare for future ones, and make strategic choices, then yes, trees check many of those boxes. But if it requires consciousness, creativity, or deliberate thought, then forests remain mindless, but still remarkable. What trees offer isn't the intelligence of thought. It's the wisdom of evolution, refined slowly over millions of years, shaped not by decisions but by trial and survival. They've learned, through adaptation, to use chemical cues, networked relationships, and environmental feedback to survive. Their intelligence isn't fast, it's not loud, but it works, and maybe that's its own kind of brilliance. So the next time you walk past a tree, any tree, consider this. It may not be thinking like you, but it's still solving problems, adapting, and responding to the world around it. It holds memory. It adapts to change. It's not a brain, it's a system. And it works quietly, beautifully, and relentlessly. Step into a forest and you enter a living history, a world that's been shaping itself for hundreds of millions of years. Towering trees reach above, while their roots anchor deep into soil woven with fungal threads. Every breath of wind and inch of ground carries signs of ancient patterns and connections. But how did such an intricate system come to be? To understand forests as they are today, we have to go far back, before flowers bloomed, before the first seeds, even before there were trees as we know them. Let's rewind the clock. Roughly 500 million years ago, Earth looked very different. Most of the continents were barren rock. The atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide. Life thrived in oceans, but land remained largely empty. That changed when a few pioneering plants began moving ashore. These early colonizers were nothing like the oaks and maples we know today. They were tiny, leafless, and rootless, more like moss than tree. Alone, they wouldn't have stood a chance. The land was unforgiving, water was scarce. Nutrients in the soil were locked away in forms plants couldn't access, and the sun's ultraviolet radiation beat down unfiltered. But these plants didn't come alone. They brought an ally: fungi. Fungi had already been living on land for millions of years, breaking down rock, partnering with bacteria, and weaving through the soil. When the first land plants arrived, the fungi were ready to team up. The deal they struck would reshape life on Earth. Fungi provided access to water and minerals, especially phosphorus, in exchange for sugars the plants created through photosynthesis. This partnership, called mycorrhiza, was likely a key reason plants could survive and spread on land at all. We know this from modern biology and from fossils. Plant remains dating back 400 million years show signs of fungal structures inside their tissues. These were arbuscular mycorrhizal relationships, still found in most plant species today. As plants adapted and improved, they evolved leaves to capture more light and vascular systems to move water and nutrients more efficiently. Roots grew deeper. Stems grew taller. This set the stage for the rise of the first trees. Forests, as we know them, appeared around 385 million years ago during the Devonian period. The early trees were strange by today's standards: no flowers, no leaves, and sometimes no wood in the modern sense. But they changed everything. With their height and mass, these trees began drawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere on a massive scale. They helped cool the planet and shift the global climate. Oxygen levels rose. Habitats expanded. Then came the Carboniferous period, around 359 million years ago. Forests exploded across the planet. Giant ferns, enormous horsetails, and towering seedless trees filled swampy landscapes. Oxygen levels reached all-time highs, so high, in fact, that dragonflies with wingspans the size of modern birds flew among the trees. As plant life diversified, so did their fungal partners. Ectomycorrhizal fungi evolved, forming new relationships with trees in temperate regions. These fungi were especially skilled at scavenging nutrients from poor soils, helping trees survive in drier, cooler climates. Forests transformed from collections of trees into complex ecosystems. Understory plants, fungi, insects, birds, and mammals emerged, forming webs of life and mutual dependence. At the heart of it all, the fungal networks. Why did cooperation and communication evolve in the first place? It's a question that still challenges researchers, but the core logic makes sense. In a forest, where organisms are rooted in place, slow-growing, and long-lived, supporting your neighbors can help ensure survival. If one tree falls, its nutrients can be shared. If a pest arrives, a warning can be sent. If a young sapling struggles, it can be fed. And fungi, they thrive when their hosts thrive. Keeping a forest healthy means more sugars for them. It's in their best interest to help. This is known as mutualism. Both partners benefit. And in forests, it often involves dozens, sometimes hundreds of species, all linked together by invisible threads beneath the soil. That doesn't mean things are always harmonious. Trees still compete for sunlight. Fungi still prioritize better partners, and some species cheat the system. But the bigger picture is one of connection. When drought hits or a fire sweeps through, the network helps the survivors recover. When conditions improve, the system regrows. It's not conscious planning. It's the outcome of millions of years of trial, error, and refinement. Evolution doesn't make decisions, but it does keep what works. And this deeply connected system, it works. It's a design shaped by time, not thought, but its elegance speaks volumes. Today, when we walk through a forest, whether a dense northern woodland or a sun-drenched tropical jungle, we're seeing the result of that long evolutionary path. But we're also seeing something fragile. Modern forests are changing fast. They face pressures from all directions: climate shifts, invasive species, deforestation, pollution. And perhaps the most jarring, time is no longer on their side. For millions of years, forests have evolved slowly. Trees take decades, even centuries, to mature. Fungal networks can span entire lifetimes. Relationships among species were shaped by patient trial and adjustment. But now, conditions change more rapidly than many forests can adapt. One major threat is climate change. As temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift, trees find themselves living in climates different from the ones they evolved in. A species that once thrived in cool, moist conditions might now suffer from heat stress or drought. And unlike animals, trees can't move. Their only hope is to shift gradually through seed dispersal, a process that can take generations. But human development, agriculture, and urban expansion have fragmented the land, blocking many natural migration routes. Some trees are already dying back. Others struggle to reproduce. In parts of the world, forests are thinning, not because of chainsaws, but because the conditions that supported them have shifted underneath their roots. Another threat is fire. Fire is a natural part of many ecosystems. In some forests, it plays a rejuvenating role, clearing deadwood, opening space for new growth, and triggering seed release in fire-adapted species. But now, fires burn hotter, longer, and more frequently. Years of fire suppression policies have allowed forests to accumulate fuel, fallen branches, leaf litter, and underbrush. When ignited, these materials turn into towering infernos that destroy even fire-resistant trees. Combined with rising temperatures and prolonged droughts, wildfires have become more devastating than ever. Entire fungal networks are wiped out. Old-growth trees, centuries in the making, are reduced to ash in hours. Then there are pests. Insects like bark beetles, which were once minor players in forest life, have become major threats. Warmer winters mean more of them survive each year. Drought-stressed trees are more vulnerable, unable to defend themselves with the usual chemical barriers. Beetle populations surge, boring into bark and cutting off nutrient flows. In some regions, millions of acres of forest have been lost in just a few seasons. And what's worse, these losses ripple through the network. When a tree dies, it doesn't just disappear. It takes with it its connections. The sugars it once sent to neighbors, the warnings it passed along, the stability it offered through root ties. Fungi that depended on it lose their partner. Saplings that relied on it for support face exposure. The network frays. This isn't theoretical. In places like the Pacific Northwest, forest scientists have documented collapsing fungal systems following the death of old-growth hosts. These trees weren't just tall, they were hubs. Without them, the wood wide web goes quiet. And yet, even in decline, forests adapt. Some trees form new connections. Fungi shift their allegiances. In the chaos, new partnerships emerge. It's not always enough, but it's a reminder that forests aren't passive victims. They're dynamic, flexible systems that will try always to hold on. In some cases, human intervention has offered support. Foresters now experiment with assisted migration, planting seeds of climate-threatened species in areas projected to be suitable in the future. Scientists study which tree-fungi partnerships offer the most resilience. Ecologists restore damaged soil with fungal inoculants, helping re-establish the networks below before the trees above even take root. And there's growing recognition that we need to protect the elders. Old-growth trees are not just tall, they're repositories of memory. They anchor networks, stabilize ecosystems, and regulate local climates. Their presence can cool surrounding air, hold water in soil, and create microclimates that buffer younger trees from extreme weather. Cutting one down isn't just the loss of a tree, it's the loss of history. But there's hope, not just in research or policy, but in a shift of perspective. We're beginning to see forests differently, not as resources to be used or scenery to be enjoyed, but as living systems, full of connections, intelligence, and quiet resilience. As something worthy of awe not because they resemble us, but because they don't, and still survive. In Japan, the practice of forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, encourages people to spend time among trees, not for exercise or productivity but for presence. To walk slowly, breathe deeply, and let the forest's rhythm calm the mind. Science has caught up with the benefits. Time in forests has been linked to reduced stress, improved immune function, and lower blood pressure. Part of that is the environment, cool air, quiet green light. But some researchers suggest the very compounds trees release, the same VOCs used for communication, may also affect human physiology. It's a poetic twist. The forest speaks, and we feel it, even if we don't understand the language. Elsewhere, indigenous cultures have long understood the value of forests. For centuries, they've lived in close relationship with trees, not just harvesting from them but honoring their presence, listening to the seasons, and understanding the importance of balance. Modern science is only now confirming what many traditional beliefs already held, that trees are not alone, that forests are not static, and that the ground beneath us is alive. The challenge ahead is not just technical, it's cultural. Can we shift our view of forests from commodities to communities? Can we recognize their intelligence without demanding it look like ours? Can we protect the old while allowing space for the new? The answers aren't easy, but they matter. Because every forest saved is a future remembered. Every tree left standing is a connection preserved. And every time we pause to listen, to breathe, to notice, we rejoin that web even briefly. We become part of the system again. Not above, not outside, just one living thing among many. We often search for wonder in the distant, space telescopes, deep-sea explorers, alien worlds. But there is mystery, brilliance, and quiet intelligence all around us. In the rustle of a canopy, the scent of warm bark, the feel of moss underfoot. In the roots we can't see. In the networks we barely understand. In the trees, always waiting, always growing, always connected. So as you listen now in this moment of stillness, remember, the forest is never silent. Even now it whispers, through air and soil, through time and memory, through you. When you consider a forest, what comes to mind? For many, it's a visual image, towering trunks, scattered sunlight, leaves trembling in a breeze. But a forest is just as much about the unseen as the visible. And in that hidden world lies one of the greatest stories science has only recently begun to piece together. Fungi, these life forms are neither plant nor animal. They belong to their own kingdom and have existed for more than 1 billion years. They're ancient, varied, and essential. Yet for most of human history, they've remained largely unnoticed, dismissed as molds, toadstools, or oddities at the edge of nature. Today, we understand fungi differently, not just as decomposers or food, but as builders of ecosystems, bridges between species, engineers of soil, and partners in plant life. They are not simply present in forests, they are part of the forest's very structure. Fungi are everywhere, even when you can't see them. That mushroom on a log is merely the fruiting body, a reproductive organ. The real fungus is the mycelium, an intricate branching network of filaments called hyphae. These hyphae thread through soil, leaf litter, tree bark, and even into the cells of plant roots. A single cubic inch of soil can contain miles of hyphae, thin as spider silk but densely packed. This is the foundation of the wood wide web. Through this underground system, fungi connect plants of the same species and even link different species together. Sugars, minerals, and chemical signals flow through these hyphal highways. It's a logistical network, moving nutrients, redistributing resources, and maintaining balance across the forest. The partnerships fungi form with plants are known as mycorrhizae, from the Greek words for fungus and root. There are two primary types. Arbuscular mycorrhizae penetrate the root cells of plants. They form tiny, tree-like structures inside the roots that allow direct exchange of nutrients. These are the more ancient form and are found in most grasses, vegetables, and flowering plants. Ectomycorrhizae, on the other hand, don't enter root cells. Instead, they wrap around the outside, forming a sheath and extending into the surrounding soil. These are common in many tree species, like pines, oaks, and birches. In both cases, the exchange is clear. The plant offers sugars, products of photosynthesis. The fungus provides water and minerals, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, that the plant cannot easily access on its own. It's a mutually beneficial trade, but it's not always equal. Some fungi are more efficient or generous than others. Some trees are choosy, favoring certain fungal partners and rejecting others. And sometimes, fungi link with multiple plants, playing the role of a broker, deciding who gets what and when. These networks can span wide areas. One famous fungus in Oregon covers over 3 square miles and is estimated to be thousands of years old. It's not a cluster of mushrooms. It's a continuous mat of mycelium underground, quietly linking trees and shrubs across the forest. In that space, it's not just the trees that live in community. It's the fungi too. Fungi can even mediate cooperation between trees of different species. A birch tree might supply carbon to a nearby fir, especially if the fir is shaded or stressed. Later, the fir may return the favor when the birch needs support. These exchanges are regulated not by the trees, but by the fungi, acting as facilitators, equalizers, and sometimes gatekeepers. But this isn't pure altruism. Fungi need the plants to survive. Without sugars from photosynthesis, they wither. So helping a struggling tree isn't a favor, it's a strategy. A healthier forest means more carbon for the fungal network. It's self-preservation on a shared scale. Some scientists have even called these fungi ecosystem engineers. They stabilize soil, hold water, decompose organic matter, recycle nutrients, and create pathways that support countless other organisms, from insects to bacteria to mammals. Fungi are not just helpers, they're architects, and in recent years we've begun to explore how we can work with them. Mycoforestry is an emerging field where foresters cultivate specific fungi to support forest health. Mycormediation uses fungi to clean up pollution, breaking down toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and even plastics. Mycofabrication explores fungal materials as alternatives to plastics, leather, and building products. In all these cases, humans are tapping into the hidden genius of fungi. But to do so responsibly, we must understand their needs. Fungi thrive in healthy, undisturbed soil. When forests are cleared or compacted, fungal networks collapse. Without them, seedlings struggle, nutrients don't circulate, and the forest's resilience declines. In reforestation projects, success rates improve dramatically when the soil is inoculated with native fungi, reintroducing the network before the trees take root. This leads to an important insight. You can't rebuild a forest just by planting trees. You must rebuild the relationships too, the partnerships, the networks, the quiet exchanges that make everything work. Without fungi, a forest is just a collection of trees, but with them it becomes a living system. And that system speaks a language all its own. It's not human, it's not verbal, but it's clear. A chemical signal when drought approaches. A nutrient shift when a neighbor is in need. A cascade of changes when fire or disease strikes. It's the language of survival, spoken in carbon, nitrogen, enzymes, and scent. And we're just starting to decode it. Scientists now study these underground exchanges using isotope tracing, RNA sequencing, and even electric sensors. What they find is startling. Not just resource sharing, but patterns, responses, adaptations, and strategies. Some fungi prioritize certain species. Others behave differently depending on the season, the weather, or the age of the trees. Some build exclusive partnerships, while others are more open, connecting anything with roots. It's not random, it's coordinated, and that raises profound questions. Are fungal networks optimizing the forest? Do they shape its growth, its boundaries, its regeneration? Are they simply passengers or hidden conductors of the ecosystem's rhythm? We don't fully know, but every year brings more clues, and with every clue the story grows deeper. Not long ago, few imagined that forests had communication systems, or that plants made choices, or that fungi formed relationships across species lines. These were the stuff of fairy tales, not science. But now they're data points. peer-reviewed findings, repeatable experiments, and yet they still feel like magic because they remind us that intelligence isn't limited to brains, that community isn't exclusive to humans, that cooperation doesn't require consciousness. Forests thrive because of relationships rooted, fungal, chemical, and ancient. They're held together by trust, strategy, feedback, and quiet adjustments. And at the center of it all are the fungi. Not loud, not flashy, but essential. They're the messengers, the traders, the builders, and perhaps in their own way the memory of the forest itself. They endure drought, fire, and frost. They weave together past and present, and they show us, again and again, that the most powerful forces are often the ones we don't see. So next time you walk through a forest, pause, look down, think of what lies beneath. And remember, the most important stories are often whispered, not shouted, but they still shape the world. There's something calming about trees, even if you don't know the science, even if you've never heard of mycorrhizal networks, carbon flows, or VOC signals, standing beneath a canopy just feels good. The air is cooler, the light is softer, time slows down. But what if it's more than a feeling? What if we're wired to respond to trees, not just emotionally, but physically? Recent research suggests that forests don't just support ecosystems, they support us. Humans have evolved alongside trees for thousands of generations. Our ancestors lived, hunted, built, and rested in their shade. The sights, smells, and sounds of wooded places became part of our biological rhythm. Today, that connection still lingers. Studies show that spending time in forests reduces cortisol levels, a key stress hormone. Heart rates slow, blood pressure drops, immune cells increase, mood improves. And the effects can last for days after a single walk. Why? Part of it comes from the environment itself. Less noise, cleaner air, more green light. But some researchers believe the trees are actively involved. Many trees release organic compounds called phytoncides, molecules that help defend them against pests, bacteria, and fungi. These same molecules, when inhaled by humans, appear to boost natural killer cell activity, part of the immune system's frontline defense. It's as if the forest's own defense chemistry spills over and strengthens us too. This isn't just folklore. In Japan, forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, has become a recognized therapeutic practice. Doctors even prescribe it to patients struggling with anxiety, depression, or chronic stress. But the forest doesn't only calm us, it changes how we think. Time in natural environments has been shown to improve focus, memory, and creativity. Children with access to green spaces perform better on cognitive tasks. Adults report more clarity and less mental fatigue. In some studies, just looking at pictures of forests improved recovery rates in hospital patients. It seems the brain, like the body, recognizes something essential in the forest. And maybe that's not surprising, because forests are systems of balance. Every leaf and root, every fungus and fern exists in relationship with others. Feedback loops keep things in check. Excess becomes nourishment. Damage becomes regrowth. Energy flows not endlessly but efficiently. It's a design refined over millions of years. And in many ways, it's the opposite of how modern life feels: fast, noisy, fragmented, overstimulated. So when we enter a forest, we don't just find quiet, we find coherence. A rhythm, a pattern, a story we once knew and are remembering again. This connection isn't just scientific, it's emotional, cultural. For many people, trees carry symbolism. They represent endurance, wisdom, and peace. They appear in myths, rituals, and poetry. They mark boundaries, memorials, and sacred spaces. Across the world, trees have been considered ancestors, teachers, even deities. In Celtic traditions, the oak was the king of the forest, strong, wise, protective. In many indigenous cultures, trees are honored as relatives, alive, aware, and deserving of respect. In Buddhism, enlightenment was reached under a tree. In Christianity, the tree of life stands at the center of Eden. These aren't just coincidences. They reflect something deep, a recognition that trees are more than matter. that they embody something enduring, something rooted, and perhaps something we're always seeking. In cities, people plant trees not just for shade or beauty, but because they change the mood of a place. Streets with trees feel safer, calmer, more welcoming. Property values rise. Air becomes cleaner. Temperatures drop. Even a single tree, planted on a sidewalk, in a schoolyard, in a prison yard, can alter how people feel and behave. This isn't magic. It's biology, chemistry, psychology, and something more. It's the forest distilled into one tall, leafy expression, a reminder of where we come from, of what sustains us, of how to slow down, of how to be still. Because while trees don't move, they are never inactive. They're always growing minute by minute, ring by ring. They're always sensing light, air, pressure, chemicals. They're always responding to drought, danger, neighbors. And they are always communicating, not in words but in signals, flows, and connections. They don't speak as we do, but they have their language, a language of survival, a language of care, a language that, for the most part, we forgot, but are now learning to hear again. In labs, researchers measure sap flow and isotope transfer. In forests, ecologists trace carbon from root to root. In classrooms, children learn about networks, feedback, and balance. And in quiet moments on trails, in gardens, or even through a window, we all feel it. That presence, that stillness, that subtle hum of life moving slowly, deeply, wisely beneath the surface. It's humbling to realize that trees, which seem so simple, are profoundly complex. That forests, which appear silent, are full of conversation. That intelligence, which we once claimed as uniquely ours, exists in many forms. Rooted, branching, networked, and that maybe, just maybe, the forest has been watching us all along. Not judging, not teaching, just being, steady, patient, and waiting for us to listen. We often assume that trees grow in isolation. One trunk, one canopy, one root system. But when we examine a forest with a deeper lens, we discover that isolation is the exception, not the rule. Trees in a forest aren't solitary. They're connected, not only by shared soil or overlapping branches, but by invisible lines beneath the ground. Through mycorrhizal networks, trees participate in a hidden infrastructure, one that links individuals into something more unified. This is the wood wide web, and at the center of that web, something surprising happens. Some trees give more than they receive. Older, taller trees, often referred to as mother trees, play a crucial role. They form the largest number of connections in a network. Their expansive canopies and deep roots allow them to absorb more light, gather more nutrients, and store more carbon than younger trees. But rather than hoarding those resources, they share them. Through fungal pathways, mother trees distribute nutrients to seedlings, especially those that are shaded, stressed, or just starting their life. This isn't random charity. It's a targeted transfer. Experiments have shown that these older trees can recognize their own offspring through chemical signals. When surrounded by multiple saplings, they favor the ones that grew from their own seeds, sending them more carbon, more nitrogen, more support. And it's not just food. Mother trees also transmit warning signals. When attacked by pests, they release alerts through the fungal network, giving nearby trees time to produce chemical defenses. It's as if the forest has an immune system. One tree falls ill and the others prepare. What's even more astonishing is that this communication can continue even after a tree has died. Some stumps, long severed from light and leaves, remain alive, sustained by sugars passed to them through underground connections. We still don't fully understand why. Perhaps the trees around them benefit from keeping the root system intact. Perhaps it's a leftover exchange that persists out of balance. Or perhaps death in a forest is not a clean break, but a transition. The idea that trees care for each other may seem sentimental, but it's rooted in observable, measurable behavior. And while care may be a human term, the effects are undeniable. Cooperation strengthens the forest. It boosts resilience. It supports regeneration. It allows the whole to survive even when individuals suffer. But cooperation doesn't mean harmony. Forests are full of competition too. Trees still battle for light. Their roots still race toward moisture. Fungi still prefer certain hosts, and not every exchange is equal. Some trees cheat, taking more than they give. Some fungi behave like parasites, but the system persists, because in the long run, connection offers more than isolation. Through cooperation, forests recover from storms. They rebound from drought. They endure cold winters and scorching summers. And in the aftermath of fire or disease, it's the networks, the links among roots, the mycelial bridges, the old wisdom stored in ancient trunks that guide rebirth. It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. The forest doesn't avoid hardship, it moves through it together. Picture a tree growing on a mountainside. The soil is thin, the wind is harsh. The sun beats down in summer and snow piles deep in winter. It seems like the worst place for a tree to survive. Yet it grows, slowly, quietly, with roots that grip stone, needles that conserve water, bark that shields against cold. It doesn't flourish the way trees in a valley might, but it endures. And in doing so, it shelters birds, holds soil in place, casts shade for seedlings, anchors the slope against erosion. It matters, not because it dominates, but because it holds on. This is the quiet strength of trees. Their power isn't in speed or noise or showmanship. It's in patience, adaptability, presence. And perhaps that's why we're drawn to them. They remind us of something we've almost forgotten. In a world that moves quickly, full of alerts and algorithms and constant comparison, trees live differently. They take their time. They focus downward before they reach upward. They bend but rarely break. They lose their leaves, then begin again. And always they stay rooted. It's a rhythm that doesn't demand attention, but invites it, to pause, to breathe, to listen, to step outside the narrow corridor of human urgency and into something older, slower, deeper. A forest doesn't ask for your productivity. It asks for your presence. Not to fix or solve or dominate, but to witness. To remember that you are not separate from the world, but part of it, one thread in a much larger weave. The trees know this. They've always known. Forests aren't just habitats, they're timekeepers. Each ring in a tree's trunk records a year, dry or wet, cold or warm. A history written in growth, silent but exact. When scientists want to understand past climates, they study tree rings. When ecologists want to grasp recovery after fire, they look at how trees regenerate. Even in death, a tree tells a story. Its wood becomes home for insects, shelter for birds, nutrients for soil. Fungi break it down piece by piece, returning its matter to the earth. Nothing is wasted, everything returns. And in that cycle, there's a kind of wisdom. The forest doesn't resist endings. It transforms them. Decay becomes fertility. Collapse becomes opportunity. Absence makes space for something new. It's a pattern repeated again and again, through fire, drought, storm, and time. And while we often fear change, the forest teaches us it's part of life. Not something to avoid, something to move with. A forest isn't static, it's dynamic, living, evolving. Every leaf that falls shifts the balance. Every root that grows rewrites the underground map. Every tree that topples opens the canopy and lets light in. Change isn't an interruption, it's the way forward. And if we let it, that lesson can shape more than ecosystems. It can shape us, because we are not so different from trees. We carry memory in our bones. We grow where we're planted, but we adapt to our surroundings. We form networks, family, friendship, community. We seek light. We weather storms. We begin again. And though we may forget it, we are nature too, not separate, not above, just another branch on the great tangled tree of life. In cities, trees stand as survivors. They grow through concrete cracks along busy streets beside skyscrapers. They endure smog, confined roots, and constant disturbance. And still, they offer shade, catch rainfall, clean the air, and cool the pavement. A single tree along a sidewalk can lower the temperature by several degrees. A row of them can reduce air pollution. A pocket of green in a neighborhood improves mental health, reduces aggression, and encourages social interaction. Urban trees don't just survive, they heal. And yet, they're often overlooked. Trimmed aggressively, planted without thought for species or space, left to struggle in silence. But when planted wisely, protected, and respected, they become vital members of the city. They turn hard edges soft. They invite birds, insects, and people back into balance. More and more urban planners now recognize this. Green infrastructure is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Trees help prevent flooding. Their roots absorb water that would otherwise overwhelm storm drains. Their canopies intercept rainfall, reducing runoff. Their presence cools urban heat islands, where pavement and glass trap warmth. In a warming world, cities need trees more than ever. But trees need cities too to care, to be planted with foresight, given room to grow, chosen for resilience, treated not as decorations but as living infrastructure. Because each urban tree is part of a broader conversation between humans and nature, between what is built and what still breathes. And as we look ahead, this conversation becomes more urgent. We're at a turning point. Deforestation, climate change, biodiversity loss, these are no longer distant threats. They're here. And how we respond will shape not only forests but our future. We can't restore the past, but we can shape what comes next. We can choose to plant, protect, and connect. We can honor the networks that sustain life, not just in forests but in all ecosystems. We can listen. And when we do, we begin to hear what was always there. When we think of intelligence, we tend to picture a brain, something centralized, fast, capable of abstract reasoning. But forests ask us to reconsider that definition. What if intelligence isn't confined to neurons? What if it exists in other forms, slower, quieter, more distributed? A forest responds to change. It shares resources. It remembers damage. It adapts. It may not think the way we do, but it reacts with purpose. That kind of intelligence, embodied in relationships and feedback, challenges our assumptions. It invites humility. For a long time, science ignored these possibilities. Trees were studied as individuals. Fungi were labeled as decomposers. Forests were dissected into components: soil, canopy, species count. But the connections, the interactions were left out. Now we understand that relationships matter. The space between trees isn't empty. It's active. It's where messages are passed, nutrients flow, and balance is maintained. It's where cooperation and conflict shape survival. That space, invisible to us, is the nervous system of the forest. And it teaches us something else too. That strength isn't always about dominance. Sometimes it's about interdependence. The forest thrives not because each tree stands alone, but because they stand together. Their survival is tied to one another. And in a time when so much of our world feels fragmented, that lesson matters. We're taught to value independence, but nature values connection. And maybe, deep down, we do too. It's why we seek community, why isolation feels wrong, why we feel better not just among people, but among trees, rivers, wind, and light. We are part of the web, and the forest reminds us of that. There's a moment that happens when you walk alone in a forest. It's quiet but not empty. Birds call, leaves rustle, twigs snap underfoot. But beneath that surface there's another kind of silence, a living stillness, one that makes you pause. Breathe slower, listen more deeply. You might not see anything unusual. No glowing lights, no whispering trees, no sudden revelations, but you feel it, something ancient, ongoing, watching maybe, or simply being. And that presence, whatever it is, can shift something inside you. You leave the forest different than you entered, calmer, clearer, more connected. You might not be able to explain why, but your body knows, your mind knows. It's as if some boundary between self and world has thinned. And in that soft space, you remember, you're not separate from nature. You are nature. Your heartbeat echoes the rhythm of seasons. Your breath moves with the trees. Your thoughts slow to the pace of moss and stone. And even if you forget it again, get caught in deadlines, notifications, and screens, the forest remembers. And it waits. not with impatience, with patience beyond comprehension. It doesn't need you to arrive on time, or say the right thing, or know the right facts. It only needs you to show up, to stand among the trunks, to touch the bark, to notice the patterns of shadow and sun, to be present. Because in presence you reconnect, not just with the forest, with yourself. The version of you that isn't hurried or distracted, the version that listens, that notices small things, that feels wonder again, that version still exists. And the forest helps you find it, not by teaching, by reminding quietly, steadily, like it always has. The sleepy narrator slows his voice, matching the rhythm of your breath. And now, here at the edge of this forest of thought, it's time to simply rest. Let your awareness drift gently, like mist between trees. Let your body grow heavy, like roots settling into earth. Let your thoughts soften, like sunlight through leaves. There is nothing to do now, nowhere to be, just this moment, this breath, this stillness, this silence. Here in the hush of the forest's dream, you are part of everything, part of the whispering roots, part of the quiet canopy, part of the ancient rhythm that pulses beneath bark and stone. You are not alone, you never were. And in this place, where trees talk without words, where fungi weave memory, where light becomes nourishment and decay becomes rebirth, you are home. The forest holds you, softly, always. Sleep well. Good night and have a good dreams.